What a year it's been! We brought you over 50 episodes with more than 1,000 dashcam videos featuring insane wrecks, dangerous drivers, epic instant justice, and more. We crunched the numbers to uncover your favorite moments of the year, and now we've brought them all together in this epic mega episode. Jonathan's mother and daughter were driving down a Texas highway in her Lincoln Navigator when traffic suddenly slowed way down, and the driver of a pickup hauling a Lexus SUV on a trailer had nowhere to go. To avoid rear-ending a car in the passing lane, the pickup driver plowed into the back of a semi-truck, obliterating the passenger side of the pickup and breaking the straps that were holding the SUV to the trailer. Jonathan's mother immediately called 911 to report the collision, then provided her contact info to the involved drivers so they could contact her for her dashcam footage. Incredibly, there were no serious injuries. Who do you think is at fault in this scenario? Should the pickup driver have left himself more follow distance? Should the car driver have given themselves less? Did the pickup driver do the right thing by rear-ending the semi? Give us your expert opinion in the comments below. This submitter was heading across an overpass on a frigid Michigan morning when he found out the hard way that the overpass had frozen over and hadn't been salted yet. When the driver of the Jeep ahead of him spotted wrecked cars and tapped the brakes, they lost control and spun into the existing wreckage. Our submitter did the same, and this was only the beginning of a 30-vehicle pileup. Our submitter's dashcam audio includes several more impacts as more vehicles smashed into his Volkswagen Jetta. He told us several people were injured, but thankfully everyone survived. Our submitter was spared from any severe injuries, and once the overpass was shut down, he was able to retrieve his belongings from his Jetta. Eli was taking a friend to get his wisdom teeth removed when they watched a pickup slam into the fender of an oncoming SUV, sending it over an embankment and into an irrigation canal.
Oh my God.
The pickup spun around and stopped just short of hitting a power pole while the SUV plunged into the water. Eli helped the SUV driver climb out of one of the rear doors as the SUV sank into the water. In the meantime, his friend helped the occupants of the pickup, an adult and 2 children. First responders arrived quickly and provided aid to everyone involved in the collision. In spite of all that, Eli's friend was still able to get his wisdom teeth removed. Robert was on his way to work in his Ford F-250 when he slowed down from 70 miles per hour to around 20 for traffic that was building up ahead of him. Sadly, the driver of the Hyundai behind him didn't notice until it was too late. The Hyundai driver had tried to swerve into the breakdown lane before rear-ending Robert's truck, sending the car tumbling before it came to rest upside down. Robert immediately called 911 before assisting the occupants. Multiple other drivers stopped to help. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured in the brutal collision. Our submitter was driving with his younger sister in the front seat. He told us she's afraid to sit in the front after watching lots of Wham Baam Dashcam videos, but he assured her that nothing bad would happen. It looks like he spoke too soon. 2 racing drivers sped by on either side before one lost control and hit the other. The 2 out-of-control vehicles proceeded to collide with 3 more, making this a 5-vehicle collision. Incredibly, our submitter's Toyota RAV4 was completely untouched, partly due to the fact that he stood on the brake pedal once the carnage began to unfold in front of him. He pulled over and checked on the occupants of the involved vehicles. Incredibly, nobody was seriously injured. He provided his dashcam footage to the victims and the responding police officers before continuing on his way. Our submitter told us this incident inspired him to upgrade to a dashcam with both front and rear camera angles. He also wanted to shout out his younger sisters, Tuntun and Princess. Randy and his wife had just left an ice cream shop when the driver of an Audi sped past them, and Randy could already tell something terrible was about to happen. Even though Randy's BMW X5 was going over 40 miles per hour, the Audi flew by them before slamming into an SUV that had entered the road. Doubtless the crossing driver believed it was safe to cross, but evidently she didn't see the Audi. Randy and his wife stopped to check on everyone involved, and he told us there were 5 occupants in the Audi, including 2 teenagers and 2 young children. Some of them hadn't even been wearing seatbelts. He also told us that the police gave the Audi driver a field sobriety test while the driver of the red SUV was taken to the hospital. Randy gave the responding state trooper a copy of his dashcam video. This submitter was a few blocks from work when a trucker made an unprotected left turn across his lane. Our submitter told us he slammed on the brakes, but it wasn't enough to prevent a collision. The warning labels on the tank indicate it's used to transport Class 3 flammable liquids, but we don't know if it was full at the time. Our submitter told us the trucker immediately admitted fault. Sadly, his 2007 Honda Accord was totaled, but he has since made a full physical recovery. David was following behind his son while he was moving for college. Watch what happened when his son pulled out in front of another SUV driver who had the right-of-way. The other driver wasn't able to stop before T-boning David's son's Chevy Traverse. The white SUV was occupied by a mother and her daughter, and David's son also had his dog on board. Amazingly, there were no serious injuries. That crash looks brutal, and we're guessing both vehicles were totaled by the impact. We're glad that everybody was okay, including David's dog, and we hope this incident didn't affect David's college plans. Jonathan was on his way to get a late-night snack and was headed down a highway on-ramp when he found himself driving behind a cement mixing truck. He tried to stay back and avoid any debris, but he didn't stay back far enough. A big chunk of dried cement was launched at Jonathan's Volkswagen Arteon by the truck's rear tires, and he couldn't avoid running it over and flattening one of his front tires. With the help of some family members, he was able to mount his spare tire, and thankfully, nothing else was damaged. He told us, "These debris have aimbot for sure." Where do you think the chunk of concrete came from? Sometimes a driver can do everything right and still get involved in a collision that isn't their fault. Donnie was driving a van down a highway when a vehicle ahead of him lost control and turned sideways, blocking his lane. With another van in the lane to his right, Donnie had no choice but to collide with both vehicles, as his own van struggled to slow down in the rain. He told us the driver of the car had fallen asleep before losing control. He got out to check on the driver before first responders arrived. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured in the collision. Samuel watched a Mustang driver weaving through traffic make a critical error when he tried to thread the needle between an SUV and a pickup driver who didn't see the speeding Mustang and started changing lanes. When the Mustang driver tried to squeeze past the pickup, the two vehicles collided. One of the Mustang's tires tore off the rim and went rolling away, while the pickup suffered a flattened tire and major body damage. With the remains of both vehicles scattered across the highway, Samuel joined the drivers on the shoulder to give the pickup driver a copy of his dashcam footage. Thankfully, the flying debris hadn't damaged his Volvo C70. This submitter was on her way to get some ice cream when she was rear-ended by a pickup driver who clearly wasn't paying attention to the road ahead of him. Thankfully, our submitter wasn't severely injured by this impact that we estimated at around 45 miles per hour, no doubt thanks to the fact that she was wearing her seatbelt. She replaced her totaled Subaru Forester with a Tesla Model Y. Upgrade! She and her husband are hopeful they won't be sending us any Tesla Cam videos, unless they involve other people, of course. Enjoy your new ride! Emily tells us she has nothing against Teslas and even drives a Model S. But watch what happened when her son Aiden encountered a Tesla behaving badly while he was driving his Chevy Bolt.
That Tesla man can't drive.
Aiden's racing reflexes saved him from a head-on collision with a blue Model 3 when the driver wandered across double yellow lines. Thankfully, they'd installed the dashcam we recommend just a week earlier. Brian was headed to pick up a friend from the airport in his Honda CRZ, but after what we're about to witness, his friend had to call for an Uber instead. While moving at around 65 miles per hour, Brian suddenly encountered debris in the road, but he had no chance to slow down or swerve before running it over. The impact sent his Honda out of control before it slammed into a cement barrier. The car then ricocheted back across the road and hit the barrier on the other side before it finally came to a stop. The multiple extreme impacts totaled the vehicle. Want to know what was in the road that caused this catastrophe? The road debris Brian hit was actually a transmission from some other vehicle. Brian has no idea where it came from, but now he's fighting his own insurance provider after they decided that the wreck was his fault. Only a couple of weeks after Steve helped his friend Corey install a new engine in his Subaru Outback, Corey was making a protected left turn when a red light runner collided with him head-on. When police responded to the scene, the driver of the black Hyundai told them her light had been green, and that Corey had been speeding through the turn to beat the light. They might have believed her story if not for one thing. Corey's dashcam had captured the event, proving the other driver was lying. She was cited for failing to obey a traffic control device and for driving distracted. Sadly, both vehicles were totaled. Rico was on his way home after picking up his son from school. As he made a protected left turn through an intersection, his Ford F-150 was suddenly T-boned by a red light runner from the left. The driver of a Ford Mustang had mistaken Rico's truck for a crowd of bystanders and slammed into the side of it. After Rico's insurance provider was quoted $45,000 to fix the damage, they chose to total rather than fix it. The 2022 F-150 Lariat was Rico's first new vehicle, and he only got to drive it for 9 months. He wanted to shout out his son Jericho, and he told us they're both huge Wham Baam fans. Eddie was approaching an intersection when an oncoming driver ran the red light and T-boned a crossing car. After the Lincoln Continental was knocked off course, it rolled right past Eddie's Ford Edge, barely scraping it before hitting a Mazda. Eddie wanted to shout out his daughters Jessica and Jewel, who watch our videos with him and his wife Naomi. He told us he got a dashcam after watching Wham Baam videos. Ricky was headed to work when she was passed by a reckless Acura driver. Her gut reaction was to slow down, but she had no idea in that moment how bad things were about to get. Ricky is thankful she'd slowed down below the speed limit by the time the Acura spun out and she struck it head-on. Incredibly, nobody was hurt in the collision. The Acura, on the other hand, was totaled. Ricky's Chevy sedan was also lightly damaged by the impact. She told us the Acura driver tried to convince her to let him repair her car himself. But after a week of radio silence, she contacted his insurance provider. You might not be surprised to find out that the Acura driver never reported the collision to his insurance provider, and he even tried to deny that the wreck had happened at all. Thankfully for Ricky, her dashcam doesn't lie. Boris was on his way to pick up his daughter from daycare when a Honda Civic abruptly pulled into his lane, leaving him with no way to avoid rear-ending it. What I didn't tell you is that Boris had his wife and 3-month-old baby in his Hyundai Sonata as well. Incredibly, nobody was injured in the collision. His Hyundai's airbags deployed, so it had to be towed away. The insurance investigation determined that the Honda driver was completely responsible after she failed to yield the right-of-way to Boris. He's now waiting to hear back from her insurance provider. He told us he's also a fan of Wham Baam Tesla Cam and he'll be getting his own Tesla soon. Nobody got hurt and you'll be upgrading to a Tesla? That's the best outcome anybody could hope for. Dominic was driving in a morning snowstorm when he watched a Buick driver attempt to turn right before sliding through the snow and colliding with the school bus in front of him. Even though the Buick was going too fast, Dominic told us the bus driver wasn't furious with the Buick driver. Nobody was injured in the collision, but the bus sustained 2 flattened tires and the Buick was severely damaged. After checking on everyone and making sure first responders were on the way, Dominic went on his way, probably headed to see Brian. He wanted to remind everyone that snow is slippery. This emitter was headed to a basketball game after work. As he drove past a car turning into a parking lot, another driver didn't see him coming and pulled out in front of him, leaving him no time to react. Our submitter's Hyundai Elantra rolled off the side of the road and into a ditch after striking the Subaru head-on. His insurance provider totaled his car and sent him a check for $8,000, but he told us that wasn't enough to pay it off. He's thankful first responders arrived quickly and that there weren't more serious injuries. He added this final message for our viewers: please be careful when coming out of a parking lot. Justin was headed straight through a green light when an oncoming driver made an unprotected left turn across Justin's lane.
A crash has been
Justin couldn't avoid T-boning the turning Hyundai. Incredibly, nobody was seriously injured in the collision. When he called roadside assistance to have his car towed, they sent a contracted tow truck operator. The towing company then held onto his Honda Civic until the other driver's insurance provider paid them for the tow, which meant he didn't get paid for his totaled car until 3 months later. John was driving his Jeep Wrangler on a typically rainy day in the Pacific Northwest. As he approached a four-way stop, he watched a white Toyota Camry speed through the stop sign on his left before T-boning an oncoming minivan. John told us this is unfortunately a common occurrence. He stopped to check on the drivers before calling 911. When the police arrived, he provided his dashcam footage to the responding officers as well as to the driver of the minivan. John told us he owns a dashcam because of the Wham Bam channels. Awesome! If you need a dashcam for your vehicle, you'll find links to our recommendations in the video description as well as coupon codes just for our fans. Michael was driving his '99 BMW Z3 Roadster, which he calls my daily driver and my baby, when a white Buick suddenly pulled into traffic before getting T-boned. Michael pulled over, as did the driver of another BMW who had also T-boned the Buick, which ended up high-centered on a traffic island before coming to a stop. Police and paramedics responded. As far as we know, the elderly Buick driver wasn't hurt, and neither were Michael or the driver of the other BMW. Michael is waiting to find out what will happen to his Z3. Dr. K merged into the left lane in preparation for an upcoming left turn, but a speeding driver behind him did not appreciate that. As Dr. K was slowing down for a roundabout, the other driver sped around and blocked him. The other driver was so filled with rage, he forgot to put his car in park and nearly let it roll into pedestrians. After correcting his mistake, he came over to Dr. K's car and hit him in the face through his window. When Dr. K informed the guy that he had a dash cam rolling, he got even more upset and smacked Dr. K's side view mirror before returning to his car and driving off. Dr. K called emergency services and reported the incident. He went to a police station with his dashcam footage to make a report, including the man's face and license plate number clearly visible. He told us the cops arrested the man and charged him for his actions. Dr. K got his side view mirror fixed, and the guy who broke it had to pay Dr. K $100 and spent a night in jail. Dr. K told us that if he hadn't had a dashcam, he probably would have easily gotten away with it all. Tia was headed to her mother-in-law's house on her day off. After waiting patiently for a traffic light to turn green, she proceeded with her left turn only to be blindsided by a speeding SUV from her left. The Infiniti SUV flew through a red light and T-boned Tia's Jetta, destroying it in the impact. Witnesses claimed the SUV driver never applied the brakes, but that isn't visible in the dashcam video. After the Jetta was totaled, Tia replaced her VW with a cloud blue-wrapped Tesla Model Y named Cindy. She told us her whole family watches our videos, and thanks to us, most of them have dashcams. This emitter was waiting at a traffic light when a Tesla Model S began making its way through the intersection. Suddenly, the driver of a white van ran the red light and T-boned the Tesla. Our submitter pulled into the nearby supercharger and called 911. Oh, did we mention he drives a Tesla too? His is an older Model S without Tesla Cam built in, so he installed an aftermarket dash cam instead. Quick note to our submitter, see where it says slow card at the bottom of the video? Your dash cam is recording at a lower quality because your memory card can't handle a higher bitrate. Upgrade to a V60 rated card to fix this. Josh was driving his Subaru Forester through some mountains in Idaho when the driver of a Chevy Malibu ahead of him suddenly lost control after hitting an unexpected patch of ice. After colliding with the hillside, the Malibu driver turned back into the road. When Josh hit the same patch of ice, he wasn't able to stop or turn in order to avoid rear-ending the Malibu. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Both drivers pulled over in a safer location before exchanging information, and now they're both waiting to see who will be found at fault by their insurance providers. Dan was headed home after dropping a friend off one night when he approached and stopped at a red light. As he waited for the light to turn green, he noticed an oncoming vehicle in a turn lane wasn't stopping or turning. The oncoming vehicle proceeded full speed through the red light, smashing head-on into Dan's Lexus GS350. The impact cut power to his dashcam and sent his car careening into another vehicle. Thankfully, Dan wasn't seriously injured, but he told us he briefly lost consciousness after his airbag deployed, and the force of the collision broke his glasses in two pieces and embedded one of them between the back seats. He also told us the other driver was very aggressive after the collision and seemed not to realize that he'd done anything wrong. He claimed he'd just gotten off work and was tired. Dan called the police and let them sort it out. Dan has legal representation and is now waiting for the insurance process to be completed while he receives chiropractic treatment for whiplash. Sadly, his Lexus will most likely be totaled. Tanner was driving his Ford F-150 at 35 miles per hour when the driver of a utility truck suddenly pulled onto the road in front of him, and slamming on the brakes wasn't enough to avoid a T-bone collision. Both drivers pulled into a parking lot to exchange information as police responded. Tanner's F-150 was totaled by the insurance company, but he bought it from them for $1,000 and got it running again himself. This proves that totaled doesn't mean irreparable or worthless. It just means that Tanner wanted to fix it more than the insurance company did. Once he had it running again, he replaced it with a newer F-150 with a crew cab. Junior was headed home from a friend's house when the driver of a Ford Edge lost control before ricocheting off a guardrail. Before Junior had a chance to react, the SUV had ended up in front of his Honda Odyssey. Junior told us the SUV was behind his A-pillar, and he only remembers the airbag suddenly activating as he T-boned it. 5 occupants, including a child, jumped out of the SUV and ran away before Junior was able to reach them. By the time police arrived a few minutes later, they had all disappeared into the night. The SUV was a rental, and the police are still searching for the people who'd been in it. Junior is now waiting to hear back from the police. Darian is a rideshare driver who was transporting a passenger one morning at 4 a.m. when the driver of a Chevy Impala ran a stop sign at full speed in front of him, and he had no chance to stop before slamming into it. Darian slammed on the brakes and honked, but there was just no way he could avoid a collision. Bystanders called 911 while Darian checked on the occupants of the Impala. When police arrived, Darian showed officers his dashcam footage, and they immediately found the Impala driver at fault. Thankfully, nobody was severely injured in the wreck. Sadly, both the Impala and Darian's Lexus RX were totaled by the collision. Nathan was on his way home from school when another driver made an illegal left turn across his lane, and at 34 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone, he slammed into the driver's side of the Honda Pilot. Police responded to the scene, and Nathan provided them with a copy of his dashcam footage to use as evidence in their investigation. The insurance company totaled his Ford Mustang after seeing the same footage. Nathan pointed out that he was using the dashcam model we recommend, and he gave it credit for the fastest insurance resolution he's ever experienced. He replaced his wrecked car with another Mustang a week later. Our submitter told us he stopped and checked on the driver of the sedan before notifying the police of the collision. He told us the driver was crying, and he also pointed out that the driver of the SUV left the scene. Kayla was on her way home from taking her best friend to work when she watched a Ford SUV from her left run a red light before smashing into another Ford SUV. The SUV that had run a red light continued rolling until it slammed into a power pole. Kayla ran to check on the occupants, and she said they were confused as to what had happened. She offered her dashcam footage to both drivers, and she let the occupants sit in her car while 911 was called. She's grateful that her own vehicle, which is less than a year old, wasn't involved in the collision. Watch what happened to Brad one night as he sat patiently at a red light. The driver of a white Subaru failed to slow down before slamming into the back of Brad's Subaru BRZ at high speed. Brad called emergency services, and first responders arrived within 10 minutes. Once the paramedics checked him for injuries, the police took Brad's contact info and sent him home. He told us they handled everything, including towing his wrecked car. The next day, he made a claim with his insurance provider. 5 days later, they totaled his BRZ, and 2 days after that, they deposited about $19,000 in his bank account. Brad still doesn't know what caused the collision, as the police refused to tell him anything else. What he does know is that the other vehicle's registration was canceled 2 days after the collision, so it's safe to assume it was totaled as well. Thanks to Australian privacy laws, we'll never know why the other driver didn't stop. This anonymous submitter was driving past a parking lot when a white car flew through a stop sign on the right, and our submitter had no opportunity to stop before slamming into it. Both the white Kia Optima and our submitter's Infiniti Q60 were disabled by the impact before the Kia driver fled the scene on foot. Both vehicles were totaled by the collision, but thanks to bystanders, he was arrested minutes later. Our submitter told us the Kia driver was charged with fleeing the scene of a collision, failing to obey a traffic control device, driving with a suspended license and no insurance, and for his second DUI. Wow! Thankfully, our submitter wasn't injured. Since the Kia driver wasn't insured, our submitter's insurance provider covered everything. Aiden was on his way home from work when the Subaru SUV ahead of him suddenly swerved to the left, and his own attempt to avoid colliding with the bumper cover in the road sent him spinning down the highway. Aiden told us his engine stalled while his Toyota Camry was spinning, but he eventually got it started and pulled over to the shoulder. He called 911 to report the debris, and a highway patrol trooper responded 20 minutes later. Aiden is thankful there was no damage done to his Camry, especially after he nearly went into the median barrier. He wanted to shout out his friend Dayton and told us they love watching all the Wham Bam channels. James was driving in Virginia when he encountered a Honda Accord stopped in the middle of a highway with a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit. James told us the Honda driver had made a U-turn before running out of gas. Moments after rear-ending the Accord, James' Mitsubishi Eclipse was struck by a Honda Pilot. All 3 vehicles involved were totaled. James told us he has no memory of the incident, but after insurance claims were filed, his insurance provider determined he was at fault for the collision and doubled his premiums. This submitter's wife was on her way to get some tacos when a distracted driver turned in front of her. Even though she stood on the brake pedal, she wasn't able to avoid T-boning the Jeep SUV. Our submitter's wife, who was pregnant, was transported to the hospital after this collision. Thankfully, both she and their baby are fine. The impact sent the white Jeep rolling onto its side. Our submitter's Jeep was also heavily damaged, so that's 2 Jeep SUVs likely totaled by this collision. Our submitter told us that, because of the bad driver, I no longer got to eat my tacos. What a tragedy! Watch what Matt witnessed happening right behind him while taking his daughter to the mall. The driver of a Toyota Avalon had cut from the passing lane to the exit lane to get around traffic. But when the SUV and the travel lane began a simultaneous merge, their evasive maneuver caused them to lose control. After striking the guardrail, the Avalon careened across the highway and into the Mazda SUV in the passing lane, smashing them both into the median barrier. The impact sent bicycles scattering across the highway as they fell from a rack attached to the Mazda. Thankfully, it doesn't look like any other drivers ran over the bikes. Matt stopped and provided a copy of his dashcam footage to law enforcement officers after they responded to investigate the cause of the collision. Taylor called 911 to report what he believed was an intoxicated Civic driver. Shortly after he led a state trooper in front of him to follow the Civic, Taylor watched it drift off the road and into a parked vehicle.
Oh. Oh.
A drunk driver, a Honda bump, and instant justice? This might be the most wham bam of wham bam moments. Well, it would be, except the Civic driver passed a breathalyzer test. He wasn't drunk and claimed he'd just fallen asleep. Incredibly, the collision ended up involving 4 vehicles in total. The Civic clipped a black VW sedan, then slammed into a Dodge SUV and pushed it into a Ford Focus, which isn't visible in the dashcam footage. Taylor stuck around to give out copies of his footage. He also told us that 2 weeks later, the Civic was still parked in the same place on the side of the road. This submitter was headed home from his girlfriend's house when the driver of a Jeep Liberty turned across his lane before slamming on the brakes. Even though our submitter slammed on the brakes and swerved, he wasn't able to avoid colliding with the Jeep at about 25 miles per hour. Amazingly, he wasn't injured at all. Police responded to the scene and cited the Jeep driver after 3 officers found them completely responsible. Our submitter is sad that his Mazda 3, which was 4 months from being paid off, will probably be totaled by insurance. He wanted to shout out his girlfriend, sister, aunt, and parents for helping him out after the collision. Trevor was driving when he watched a Honda driver pull out in front of traffic before colliding head-on with an oncoming vehicle and sending it careening toward Trevor's Subaru Impreza. Trevor stopped and called 911, then checked on the driver of the red car while others assisted the driver of the tan Honda. Police arrived within minutes while paramedics took a little longer to respond. Interestingly, one of the state police pointed out that the Honda had some kind of classic vehicle license plate on it, which the officer found to be a little sus. Lewis was being followed closely by the driver of a black Honda. As he rounded a curve, the Honda driver took the opportunity to speed around Lewis before losing control. The Honda driver went too fast into the curve and slid into a parked SUV. Lewis stopped to check on the occupants, and neither of them were seriously injured. Lewis called 911, but he told us the police never responded. Instead, 2 tow trucks arrived to take both vehicles away. Evidently, the owner of the SUV wasn't home at the time, but Lewis sent a copy of his dashcam footage to one of their neighbors. Imagine coming home and finding that. Miles was on his way home after picking up some fast food when he watched a pickup truck run a red light and get T-boned by an SUV. Miles told us the light was red for around 7 seconds before a white Chevy Silverado drove out in front of a silver Nissan Rogue, where it was hit on the driver's side and spun completely around. He also told us he saw people getting out of their vehicles after the collision and didn't see that anybody had been injured. He left us with this note: no matter how long your green is, always look both ways for these guys. Kenny was driving down a highway in New York when he was passed by a pickup truck with a canopy carrying bicycles on a bike rack. Moments later, the pickup spun out for no apparent reason. After careening across the other lane and going off the highway sideways, the pickup rolled not once, not twice, but 3 times before finally settling. In all that rolling, the contents of the pickup were strewn everywhere. Kenny's brother pulled over so the 2 of them could render aid. Miraculously, the driver of the pickup wasn't seriously injured. In fact, Kenny told us the driver immediately began loading his cargo back in his pickup. Kenny said the guy even passed a concussion test easily, but we're pretty sure that pickup truck wasn't about to get back on the road anytime soon. Kenny said, "Please check your tires." His were worn out and not up to the task. Aaron was approaching a traffic signal when it turned green, and he proceeded through the intersection at about 25 miles per hour. Suddenly, the driver of an oncoming Chevy Impala turned across his lane and he couldn't avoid a collision. The head-on collision totaled both the Impala and Aaron's Chevy Malibu. Paramedics and sheriff's deputies responded almost immediately after both his vehicle and his phone called 911 automatically. Ironically, the Malibu was actually a rental, as Aaron's Ford Taurus was in the shop for major repairs at the time. He's very thankful he paid for extra rental insurance, although the Impala driver did admit fault at the scene. Ignacio was headed to college and was waiting at a traffic light when he witnessed a T-bone collision in the intersection ahead of him. It's unclear what color the oncoming SUV's light was, but what is clear is that the driver made an unprotected left turn before colliding with a driver that had sped up to get through their own yellow light. The result was the SUV flipping onto its side and coming to rest against a traffic island. Ignacio provided his dashcam footage to the responding police as bystanders ran to help the drivers. Jason was on his way to work when he watched a car hauler take an on-ramp too fast before rolling over and dumping 3 pickups onto the highway. Okay, that guy is very fired. Thankfully, Jason was able to slow down and avoid hitting the tipped-over top-heavy truck trailer. Nobody else was pulverized by the plummeting pickup payload either. After verifying that nobody was hurt, aside from the driver's employability that is, Jason continued, but he told us he knew right away he needed to send this footage to Wham Baam Dashcam. Thanks, Jason. Sean was driving his Dodge Ram 2500 on his way to pick up his girlfriend from work when a turning box truck blocked his view of a GMC pickup turning into the road ahead of him. Thankfully, Sean was able to slam on the brakes, preventing the collision from being any worse. The other driver took full responsibility and apologized, and our insurance provider paid for the repairs to Sean's pickup. Thankfully, nobody was injured, including Sean's dog, who had been riding in the back seat. Fixing Sean's 2003 Dodge Ram 2500 cost $1,700 US. This submitter watched a pickup driver merge across a solid line into a lane that wasn't clear, forcing an SUV driver to swerve into an impact attenuator. Our submitter hadn't noticed the pickup's maneuver at first and assumed the SUV driver had been driving distracted. But it's clear from his footage that the pickup driver was the one not paying attention. He also told us his dashcam has saved his bacon twice already, once from a scammer and once in a hit and run. If you need a dashcam, check out our recommendations in the description along with coupon codes for our fans only. This submitter was driving one very rainy day when visibility was quite low. He'd made sure to turn on his daytime running lights so other drivers would notice him, but that didn't seem to matter when he was forced to stop. A large truck pulling a trailer hit a car that was stopping behind our submitter before shoving it into the back of our submitter's Renault. The ensuing carnage ended up involving a total of 8 vehicles. 7 ambulances responded, as did the police, who were delayed by 3.5 hours due to flooding. The wreckage caused over 6 miles of traffic to back up. Our submitter told us that 4 of the vehicles involved were totaled. Ready for the weird part? The driver of the truck who'd caused the whole thing tried unsuccessfully to drive away. When that didn't work, he left, and his brother returned and claimed to be the driver instead. He claimed that the entire situation had been caused by the driver of the Renault that rear-ended our submitter. But thankfully, his dashcam shows what really happened. Our submitter's vehicle is getting fixed, and since his insurance only covers part of the repairs, the truck driver will be paying over $10,000 US out of his own pocket to pay for the rest. Ouch! Alex was driving along with his son Daniel when they watched a pickup turn left across oncoming lanes, T-boning a hatchback. Alex stopped, as did several other witnesses. His dashcam footage does show the white Hyundai driver had a green light seconds before the impact, but sadly, the light is cut off by the video frame when the collision occurs. This makes it unclear who was at fault, depending on if the pickup driver had a protected turn arrow or not. As far as Alex knows, his is the only video footage of the collision that exists, and witnesses disagreed about the facts. Alex wanted us to shout out his son Daniel, who was excited to witness his first vehicle collision so they could send the footage to Wham Bam. Thanks, guys! The timing is dubious, but it does appear that the white Ford Explorer entered the intersection while the light was yellow, making that driver's actions legal and giving them the right of way. The driver of the other SUV, on the other hand, definitely entered the intersection at high speed after the light had turned red. Thankfully, our submitter told us both drivers appeared uninjured as he called 911 for them. Matt was driving down a California highway when he watched a Dodge Durango and a Chevy Astrovan try unsuccessfully to occupy the same space at the same time.
Oh, it was an accident.
When the two drivers both merged into the same lane simultaneously, the result was the Chevy van pit maneuvering the Durango before it slammed into the guardrail. Thankfully, both drivers were able to safely pull over. This emitter was headed to a friend's house when an SUV driver turned out onto the road in front of his '99 Accord. Even though he slammed on the brakes, he was unable to avoid T-boning the SUV. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured in the impact. When police arrived, they found the SUV driver completely responsible. Sadly, the Honda Accord coupe our submitter had been restoring was totaled in the collision, but he used the insurance settlement to replace it with a newer Accord instead. Hammy is a trucker who was on his way to his final stop in downtown Chicago after a week-long trip. As the traffic in the lane to his right began to slow down, the driver of a black Nissan Altima made a very expensive miscalculation. The Altima driver tried to cut in front of Hammy's truck, but they misjudged the gap and collided with the front corner, damaging his deer guard, bumper, and fog light. Meanwhile, the Altima lost control and collided with a Ford Fusion, which Hammy thinks will most likely result in those two vehicles being totaled. All involved drivers pulled over, and state police arrived less than a minute later. The cops had everyone continue to the next exit. Once there, the Altima driver immediately began blaming Hammy for the collision. In the chaos, he didn't know who was at fault, as the whole incident had happened so quickly. Thankfully, his dashcam footage allowed the police to conclude their investigation instantly. The Altima driver was proven responsible, and Hammy was cleared of any wrongdoing. Thankfully, nobody had been injured. Sadly, but perhaps not surprisingly, the Altima driver was uninsured. Fixing Hammy's truck will cost $5,000 US, which his employer is paying for. But if you thought that was the end of the story, you're wrong. 2 days later, the Altima driver called Hammy's boss and threatened her with a lawsuit. She laughed at him and wished him good luck before guaranteeing him he wouldn't make a penny off her. Hammy told us he's grateful for his dashcam, knowing his spotless driving record would have been done for if not for the footage proving his innocence. The stories of drivers caught in their lies are just starting, so buckle up. David was heading to dinner with his wife when he watched a pickup truck get T-boned by a Scion running a red light. The pickup rolled over and came to rest on its roof after being struck by the white Scion XB, which had actually been sideswiped by another car with a green light before it hit the pickup. David stopped to help, and so did plenty of other drivers. David called 911 before giving copies of his dashcam footage to the involved drivers. This emitter had just finished up a night shift and was heading home when a car ahead of him lost control. Our submitter told us the roads were wet after recent rainfall. He stopped to check on the driver of the car, which was actually one of his coworkers. Another coworker behind them also pulled over to help. The driver of the Camaro called 911 while our submitter waved at other drivers to slow down. A doctor also pulled over to render aid while they waited for paramedics. Incredibly, the driver of the wrecked car wasn't seriously injured. This emitter was stopped on the side of a road where the speed limit is about 40 miles per hour. Without warning, a Hyundai Tucson going way above the speed limit smashed into his rear tire. Our submitter told us that neither he nor the other driver were injured. The Hyundai driver accepted liability, and police responded and watched our submitter's dashcam footage at the scene. His BMW was towed to a body shop where it is now waiting to be inspected. It had around 12,000 miles on the odometer at the time of the collision. Our submitter thinks the Hyundai will be totaled even after it somehow avoided rolling completely over. Forrest was driving down an Ohio highway in his Hyundai Elantra. As the lane to his right began to end, an Audi driver suddenly sped up next to him before hitting the front of his car as she tried to merge into his lane. Both drivers pulled over to exchange information, but the Audi driver didn't have any identification on her, so Forrest had no way of confirming her identity. He ended up calling the police to the scene just in case. He has since filed a claim with the Audi driver's insurance provider, but he sent us his dashcam footage before he'd heard back from them. Darius was driving down a Colorado highway when the driver ahead of him suddenly slammed on the brakes before plowing into the back of an SUV. The SUV had been stopping for a service vehicle that was blocking the lane, and the driver of the car hadn't noticed until it was too late for their brakes to save them. Darius made sure everyone was okay, then called 911. He also sent copies of his dashcam footage to the SUV driver and the police, which were sure they appreciated. Angie's son Cameron was heading home from school when another student pulled out in front of him and he wasn't able to avoid T-boning his Ford Mustang. Cameron's Volvo SC90 was sadly totaled, but thankfully there were no serious injuries. What frustrates Angie is that the Mustang driver couldn't see Cameron coming due to parents parking in a bike lane marked "No parking anytime." Kids make mistakes, we get that. The Mustang driver shouldn't have pulled into the road without knowing if there was traffic coming. That said, shouldn't the adults know better? Even more shocking was the fact that first responders took over 40 minutes to respond to the scene. Angie sent along a shout out for Mr. A teacher who kept Cameron calm until firefighters and police finally showed up. Stephen's wife Regina was headed home from her overnight hospital shift when she fell asleep at the wheel before her Mitsubishi ASX collided with a power pole. Regina had only dozed off for a second, but that was all it took. The impact totaled her Mitsubishi, but thankfully she wasn't seriously injured. They accepted a cash settlement from their insurance provider and replaced their vehicle with a Ford Ranger. Stephen wanted to shout out his wife and his son Seth, and he told us they watch Wham Bam videos as a family. Jake was driving his Subaru WRX when the driver of a Cadillac Escalade pulled in front of him, forcing Jake into a T-bone collision. It sure looks like the Cadillac driver ran a red light, but intended to go all the way across the road and turn left. If only we could take a look at this collision from another angle. As it turns out, we can. The driver of a Tesla captured the incident on TeslaCam and shared it with Jake, and that turned out to be a lifesaver. Jake told us the Escalade driver was working hard to spin the story. The combination of Jake's dashcam footage and the TeslaCam footage cleared Jake and proved the Cadillac driver fully responsible for the destruction of Jake's brand new Subaru. But that's not all. The insurance settlement actually paid for Jake's new Tesla Model 3 to replace his WRX. He told us he's happy to be a part of the Tesla gang now. Talk about an upgrade. Patrick and his wife were headed back to Canada when he noticed traffic ahead of them slowing down to a crawl. As he started slowing down, he noticed a white pickup truck in the passing lane go speeding past them. No doubt Patrick and his wife were startled to watch the unaware pickup driver plow into the back of traffic, shoving a hatchback into the median and rear-ending an SUV as well. Patrick said it didn't seem like the pickup driver even tried to slow down. They pulled over and called 911, informing the Tennessee Highway Patrol they had dashcam footage of the wreck. Later, they sent the THP their video via email. Patrick told us he wishes people would be more careful when driving and pay attention. He also thinks front and rear dash cams should be mandatory safety features in all new vehicles. This submitter was on his way to work one morning when a random man came stumbling out of the woods before throwing himself in front of and then onto his Subaru Forester. After throwing himself on the front of our submitter's vehicle, he sped off before the guy was able to hit it with his stick. When he posted this video to a local group on social media, he got a surprising comment in response. Someone else told him they'd witnessed the incident from a vehicle following behind him, and the crazed man ran back into the woods after our submitter drove away. He said he's now nervous anytime he drives on that ramp. He also said, to anyone and everyone without a dash cam, get one. Get the best you can afford with front and rear cameras if possible. Sean was on his way to get the power steering lines replaced in his 1983 Chevy K20 and was driving down a snowy highway at about 40 miles per hour when his truck lost control. After spinning completely around, Sean's truck was hit by his brother's Suburban after he wasn't able to stop in time. The impact damaged the driver's door of the pickup and severely damaged the Suburban's front end. A tow truck took the Suburban home while Sean was able to continue driving his truck. He told us they spent the rest of the summer fixing both vehicles, but he never told us if he got the power steering lines replaced. Today's first video comes to us from Paul in California, and while it may seem unremarkable at first, keep watching because this highway collision was captured from multiple angles and you'll only see them here. Paul was headed south on I-5 when he watched an SUV driver pit maneuver themselves off the front of a semi-truck before spinning off the highway. Paul called 911 and reported the collision, then contacted the trucking company to provide them with his dashcam footage. The company then gave him a copy of their own footage, along with permission to share it with us. The trucker's perspective reveals that the Buick SUV actually slammed head-on into a culvert ditch after leaving the interstate. Ouch! Miles was on his way back to work after a lunch break when another driver pulled in front of him, giving him no opportunity to stop before colliding with them. Miles slammed on the brakes, but his 2013 Ford Fusion lost traction and slid into the back of the Chevy Malibu. The impact rendered his car undrivable, and his smartwatch automatically summoned first responders to the scene. Thanks to Miles' dashcam, the Malibu driver was found responsible for causing the collision. He told us he replaced his beloved Fusion with, get this, a 2015 Ford Fusion. Aiden was driving his Ford Edge when a Subaru driver made a right turn across his lane. Aiden had no chance to react before colliding with the Subaru that had illegally blocked his lane. The impact was severe enough to put both drivers in the hospital. Conveniently, the collision happened right in front of a tow truck business, and two tow trucks immediately cleared their vehicles from the street. Aiden wanted to thank the police officers, firefighters, and paramedics for responding and for treating them with care. Gene was sitting in a parking lot when he got a front row seat to the demolition of a Subaru BRZ. Somehow the Subaru driver lost control before slamming head-on into a power pole right in front of Gene's Ford Maverick. Incredibly, the driver got out of the car seemingly unhurt after the airbags deployed. By the way, we weren't sure what kind of car this was, so we asked our Patreon supporters over on our Discord server. Huge shout out to them for helping us identify it as a Subaru BRZ. Gene told us he offered his dashcam footage to the responding police, but they never reached out for it. I'm guessing they didn't need it in this case, but not all collisions are so cut and dry, as we'll see later in the video. Sergio was driving when a speeding driver ran their red light and T-boned his Alfa Romeo. In addition to Sergio's car, the red light runner collided with two more vehicles, with the only surviving vehicle being a pickup truck. The other three were all totaled by the impact. First responders arrived within minutes. Thankfully, there were no life-threatening injuries. Sergio has filed an insurance claim and is still waiting for the investigation to be concluded. Ismail sent us this video from when he was driving in Las Vegas. While waiting at a traffic light, he watched an unmarked law enforcement SUV turn in front of him before it was struck by a Mustang driver running a red light.
Oh!
Ismail didn't stick around to find out what happened, but I think we can safely assume the officer was not happy with the Mustang driver after he sped through the red light and likely totaled both vehicles. Our first submitter was approaching an intersection he called Notorious for collisions when an oncoming driver ran their red light before T-boning another SUV, sending it rolling through the air. After the impact, the Jeep rolled onto its side, and we can actually see the airbags on the passenger side inflating moments before the Jeep lands. Our submitter rendered aid while his wife called 911. With the help of bystanders, he helped the Jeep driver out and made sure nobody was injured. First responders arrived 5 or 6 minutes later, but our submitter told us the driver of the red SUV admitted to exceeding the 35-mile-per-hour speed limit by 10 to 15 miles per hour before the police arrived. He later sent a copy of this footage, which clearly shows the red SUV running the red light, to the Colorado Springs Police Department after they requested it. Today's first video comes to us from a DoorDash driver who was on his way through a construction zone when the driver of an oncoming garbage truck failed to yield before turning across our submitter's lane.
A crash has been detected.
Even though our submitter stood on the brake pedal and held down his horn, he was going 40 miles per hour, and there was no way he could avoid hitting the garbage truck that should have never been in front of him. Our submitter told us the garbage truck driver said he'd thought the road ahead of him was closed, so he'd followed the car ahead of him through the flashing yellow light. Sadly, his Honda Insight was totaled. Even worse, the fast food he was delivering went flying. I'm guessing he didn't get a tip for this delivery. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously injured, and he's planning to use the insurance settlement to upgrade to a Tesla Model 3. Sweet!
Wham! Bam, we got a Patreon man. Please support the show.